On the pasuk Zocher es Yom HaShabbos lekadshoy, the Mechilta says Zocher v'Shomer, these two words, one which says in the Aseres HaDibros in Parshas Yisro, one in Parshas Vayeschanan, both of them were said b'diburecha. They were once said in one utterance of Hashem. In a similar way, we have the pasuk Mechaleleho Mois Yumos, speaking about Shabbos, Chilul Shabbos, and on the other hand, there's a pasuk of Yom HaShabbos. On Shabbos, he's supposed to bring 2 lambs as the korban musaf. These 2 things were also said b'dibur echad, as one statement, as in one utterance by Hashem. And the Mechilta goes on to give another few examples of such things. Then the Mechilta says, Zocher v'Shomer, another limud, that you should remember Shabbos before Shabbos starts. You should guard Shabbos after Shabbos finishes, which teaches us Moisifin Michoil ala Kodesh. We need to add from the weekdays to the holiness. In other words, we take some of the time before Shabbos and after Shabbos also to make it as part of Shabbos. The Mechilta goes on to give a mashal of a wolf, that when it attacks, when it takes its prey, it takes both from that which is in front of it, it also takes from that which is behind it. It grabs from in front of it and behind it. And the Rebbe asks, what's the connection between these 2 pirushim about this concept of adding from Michoil ala Kodesh, adding from weekday to Shabbos, to this idea of Shomer v'Zocher were both said as in one utterance? Because clearly, if they're both things being taught on the same pasuk, on the same words, there must be a connection. Now, the Mechilta, as we just said, learns this idea of Hoisafa Mechoil ala Kodesh, adding from weekday to Shabbos, from the pasuk Zocher es Yom HaShabbos, that makes it sound like it's primarily a din regarding Shabbos. Now, in the Gemara, this same halacha is learnt out from another pasuk. It's learnt out from a pasuk that says by Yom Kippur. The pasuk says V'nisem es nafshei seichem. You should be fasting b'sishol hachodesh on the 9th day of the month, ba'erev in the evening, me'erev ad erev tishbesu shabbatchem, which the Gemara basically learns out from this pasuk that any time there's an expression in the Torah of resting from work, so we need to be moisef mechol ala kodesh. We always need to be adding from the weekday to the kodesh, so starting a little bit before Shabbos or Yom Tov or Yom Kippur and continuing afterwards. In other words, according to this Berais and the Gemara, Shabbos, Yom Tov, Yom Kippur is really all the same thing. And we need to understand why is it that according to the Mechilta, which we just quoted before, that learns it out from Zocher es Yom HaShabbos and Shomer es Yom HaShabbos, there seems to be something unique about Shabbos, different to the other Yom Tov and Yom Kippur. Says the Rebbe, it's difficult to say that according to the Mechilta, actually we don't even have to have this toisvus, this additional part of holiness by Yom Kippur and Yom Tov. But rather it seems to be that the main difference is that according to the Gemara, we're going to learn out all 3 things, Shabbos, Yom Tov, Yom Kippur, all from the same pasuk. According to the Mechilta, yes, we do learn the other things from the psukim of Yom Kippur, but Shabbos has something unique in its way of adding to Shabbos, different to the other ones. And that we learn out from the pasuk of Zocher es Yom HaShabbos. How do we understand this? The Rebbe says that this special chiddush that we learn out, that the Mechilta learns out by Shabbos, that's actually going to be what's hinted in the mashal that's brought from the wolf that takes from that which is in front of it and that which is behind it. Because seemingly you could ask, a mashal is usually there to help you understand something. How is the mashal of the wolf helping us understand anything? So the Rebbe says the explanation is, when we look at this idea of adding from choil, from weekday to holiness, taking from the holiness into the weekday, this can really be understood in 3 different ways. One way of understanding it, it's an obligation on the human being, on the person. He should accept Shabbos and rest at that time from doing work. If he didn't accept Shabbos, then there's no prohibition on him doing work. A second way of understanding it is that the Torah is telling him he's not allowed to do work at this particular time. Even if he didn't accept it upon himself, he's still not allowed to do work. In these 2 ways, it's still all about the obligation on the person. Then there's a third way of looking at it. It has nothing to do with the person. It's the Shabbos itself is extending both to the time before it and afterwards. And therefore the person is not allowed to do work. Says the Rebbe, this is going to be the difference between the Gemara and the Mechilta. The Gemara is learning it out from the idea that any time the Torah tells you to rest, we need to add some before and some after. In other words, it's all about the rest of the person. The person is an obligation to rest. According to the Mechilta, however, which we're now saying is learned from the pasuk of Zocher es Yom HaShabbos, mashal of the wolf, what we're saying is Shabbos itself is extending to before and after, like the wolf, that the wolf is taking from that which is in front of it and that which is behind it. Now, why would there be a difference between Shabbos and Yom Tov and Yom Kippur according to the Mechilta, which makes this differentiation? Is saying this only about Shabbos, doesn't say this about Yom Tov and Yom Kippur. So the Rebbe explains this is connected to a fundamental difference between Shabbos and Yom Tov. As we know, Shabbos is a day that's holy on its own. Every 7 days you have Shabbos. Yom Tov, on the other hand, is dependent on what's called the setting of the months of Rosh Chodesh. Yidden, the Beis Din, are the ones that have to decide when Rosh Chodesh is and therefore when Yom Tov or Yom Kippur is going to be. So therefore, since Shabbos itself in its essence is something that the holiness is just there by itself, so too in the additional time is also something that just extends by itself from Shabbos. As opposed to Yom Tov or Yom Kippur, which is from the outset dependent on Yidden, so too that time of addition will also be dependent on that the Yid is the one that needs to decide to rest or to add to this time of Shabbos or of Yom Kippur or Yom Tov. Now the Rebbe says, what's the practical difference? According to the Gemara, if it's based on the fact that the person needs to rest, so if the person does a malacha, if the person, and it's all coming because of this limud, of this learning that anytime the Torah says to rest, we need to add. So then if the person does a malacha, so yes, he was over, he violated this mitzvah saseh of resting, but he was not over on any loy saseh of not doing work. Whereas according to the Mechilta, that Shabbos itself extended both before and afterwards, that means the Kedusha of Shabbos is there before and after, then the person would also be over on the Isur of not doing work on Shabbos. Says the Rebbe, now we could also understand the connection between the different statements of the Mechilta. First, we speak about the idea of a mitzvah saseh, like the mitzvahs loy saseh, of different things that were said together, like Shomer and Zochar, or the different mitzvahs of, for example, not desecrating Shabbos and bringing the karbonos on Shabbos that were said together. So the Rebbe says the pshat that they were said together, what it's telling us is that the loy saseh, not to do work on Shabbos, lechatchila does not apply in the case when you need to bring the karbonos. So in other words, it's not that we have a mitzvah to bring karbonos, so we're now going to push away the loy saseh. Rather, the mitzvah itself of bringing the carbon is connected not only to the mitzvah to say of now bringing a carbon on Shabbos, but it's connected to the loy saseh of not desecrating Shabbos. In other words, the loy saseh from the outset was not said in the case of bringing the carbon, and so to the other examples that the Mechilta gives regarding other mitzvahs. So it's a continuation to this that the Mechilta is bringing this concept of adding to Shabbos, telling us that when we add on Shabbos, it's not only about the person adding to Shabbos, but as we explained, it's Shabbos itself extending. The Kedusha itself is extending both before and after, and that's why, as we explained, that when we add to Shabbos, it's connected both to the Aseh as well as to the Loy Saseh, like we just explained regarding Mechalalel Mois Yumos, and bringing the karbonos on Shabbos. To take it a step even deeper, says the Rebbe, when the Mechilta brings this idea of Zochar to have Shabbos start before and continue after, and it continues to after these drashes, coming in continuation of the drashes of the different things that were said b'dibur echad as one utterance from Hashem. The Mechilta is teaching us another aspect in relation to this idea of the wolf grabbing before it and after, and that is, in order to teach, because first you have a simple question. If the Torah wants to teach us that certain dinim were not said in certain cases, so you're allowed to bring the carbon even if it's Shabbos, it didn't have to be said in this miraculous way as one utterance from Hashem. They could have just been said one right next to the other, and we would have learned. That means that this din doesn't apply in this case. From the fact that it says b'dibur echad, what it's telling us is that really both of them in essence are one nekuda. Meaning to say that just like in Shabbos, Shomer and Zochar is a loy saseh and an aseh. They're both one nekuda. It's both about the sanctity of Shabbos. Even when what we're doing is, whether it's resting or not doing work. In a similar way, when we say, for example, they are allowed to bring the carbon on Shabbos and it's not desecrating Shabbos, it's not the pshat that this is a condition in the loy saseh that in this case we're going to allow you to do it. Rather, what we're saying is they're both one nekuda, to the extent that if I don't bring the carbon on Shabbos, not only am I missing out on the aseh, in a certain sense, I'm now violating the loy saseh of desecrating Shabbos. To that extent, they are one. That's why they're b'dibur echad. And the Rebbe says that's going to be very. This is why the Mechilta continues from that, speaking about the idea of Shabbos. That in Shabbos it works the same idea that we said that Shabbos continues, automatically extends both before and after. And by the way, the Rebbe says one of the differences will be to say that you could even say Kiddush before that official time of Shabbos, if we say that the Kedusha is automatically extending. This is to teach us that the Shabbos and the time before Shabbos is exactly the same. Just like the Lav and the Asay of the previous examples of the Karbonis and Chilul Shabbos are one, so too over here when we speak about Shabbos and the time before Shabbos or after Shabbos, they have exactly the same Kedusha. And for this is again hinting the mashal of the wolf that devours both and grabs both before and after, because the Gemara tells us that the general style of a wolf is to tear up its prey first, to grab it, and then to eat it. And this is what we're saying, that just like by the Ze'ev, the way it works by itself is exactly the same way to what it's going to grab before it and after it, that which is in front of it and behind it. The Toirev is both what it does for itself in its regular way of eating and also the way it attacks the other animals. In the same way over here, both that which is before Shabbos and after Shabbos are exactly the same as Shabbos itself. Now the Rebbe moves on to another aspect. The Tzemach Tzedek says that this idea that the Mechilta gives the example of the Ze'ev that grabs before it and after it, and this is the whole point of adding to Shabbos, the Tzemach Tzedek connects this to the Pasuk Binyamin Ze'ev Yitraf. That Binyamin is compared to a wolf, which the Gemara says is a remiss to the Mizbeach. And as the Medrash explains, that just like a wolf grabs, the Mizbeach grabs the Karbonis. Now the Rebbe wants to connect this explanation that we gave it of the Mechilta, the way Tosfos Shabbos works, that Shabbos by itself is taking from the time of the weekday and making it holy, that in a similar way we have regarding the Mizbeach. So first the Rebbe suggests in one particular way how we have a din that even things that weren't worthy going on the Mizbeach, if even things that shouldn't have gone on the Mizbeach, but if they go up, they become holy, which is a similar sort of idea that something that wasn't holy, but because it went on the Mizbeach and connected to the Mizbeach, it becomes holy. The Rebbe is not completely satisfied with this comparison for a number of reasons, but then the Rebbe brings that the connection we really see. And when we look in that pasuk about Binyamin, the pasuk goes on to say, which the Medrash explains that to mean the carbon tamid that's brought in the morning and the carbon tamid that's brought in the afternoon. And here we're going to see the comparison, the similarity to Shabbos or to the wolf. Generally, we know carbonis need to be brought during the day. However, there's also the concept that we burn the fats and the limbs also during the whole night. There's also in the morning, there's something called Trumas Hadeshen, where we take off the ashes off the Mizbeach, and this is before the carbon tamid. So here we see this comparison that just like by the wolf, the fact that we bring the mashal of the wolf, and similar to Shabbos as well, what it's revealing to us is that it's part of the Geder of the Mizbeach itself. In other words, that this is part of the Kedusha and the Shleimus of the Mizbeach, that the Mizbeach also grabs, so to speak, that which is before it and after. That means that the avodah of the Karbonis of during the day is connected and also making holy both the avodas that are done before the Tamid of the morning as well in the night afterwards.